Good afternoon and welcome. We will just wait for a few more of our audience to join and we shall get underway. Good afternoon and welcome to Healthy Minds. My name is James Callender and I will be shortly joined by my colleague Oliver Brecht. We wish to start by recognising the traditional owners of the different lands we work on today and the First Nations people present in this session. I pay my respect to all elders past and present and acknowledge and celebrate the diversity of First Nation people, their cultures and connections to the country and waters of this great vast land. Next slide, please. This afternoon, we will be exploring the concept of healthy minds and checking in with our friends and family and colleagues. There are a few thought nuggets that I would encourage you to consider as we move through this conversation this afternoon. The first is that mental health is a continuum and we all sit somewhere different. It is also important to remember that we move along the continuum. So when we last checked in on someone and they were well, they may not be the same this time. And the same also goes for ourselves. We also move. The second being to learn and remind ourselves of how to check if we have a healthy mind before we check in on others. We'll have an open chat about the fact that it is also okay if you don't have a healthy mind and how to politely decline supporting someone else if you are not in the right place yourself. Thirdly, we will be picking up some strategies on how we can maintain our own healthy mind. For me personally, I know that exercise is a big part of my balance. And I'll share a personal example around a recent funk that I was caught in and how exercise pulled me through. And finally, we'll be reflecting on some genuine ways to check in on our friends and family. And for those of us joining from work, how we can check in on our colleagues. Next slide, please. We often consider where others sit on this mental health continuum. However, many of us neglect to reflect on where we sit ourselves. It is imperative that we understand where we sit so that we are in a good place to ask someone if they are okay. Oliver, can you please explain the mental health continuum for those of us who may not have heard of it before or have never seen it in this format?
Yes, certainly. So what the mental health continuum is teaching us here is around the fact that at any point in time, we are in a state of mental health and mental well-being. And that would be either what we'd consider to be optimal or all the way down to what we might consider poor. And a range of different factors can influence that, in addition to whether or not there is the presence of a mental illness, for example, or there is no presence of a mental illness. Things like our daily work pressures, maybe how things are going in our relationship, our health, can impact our mental well-being and mental health, but not be classified as a mental illness. So at any one point in time, we are in a state of mental health. And if we are managing our lives, if we're managing our stress, if we're managing you know, our daily habits, we'll be able to hopefully remain in a state of positive mental well-being, regardless of whether we are living with a mental illness or no mental illness as well.
Thank you, Oliver. Next slide, please. So checking in if I have a healthy mind, we can see a couple of cogs here reflecting or representing our own minds. Oliver, when I'm thinking about times when I have a healthy mind, sometimes I feel that it depends on the time of the day, time of the week, or even time of the year. However, is there a more scientific way to check in if I have a healthy mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's considering that our mind impacts a variety of different areas of ourselves. And when we talk about our psychology, what we're really talking about is our emotions, our attitudes, and our behaviors. What you might also refer to as behaviors as our actions. What actions are we engaging in? Our emotions being what feelings are we having? And our attitude being the mindset that we are holding. So a way of being able to reflect on whether or not you are currently living in an optimal state of well-being, or whether you have onboarded a healthy mind or living with a healthy mind in that moment, is to take time to reflect on what behaviors or actions am I exhibiting at the moment? Am I interacting with people how I usually do? Am I as compassionate or acting compassionately towards people as I usually do? Am I engaged in my pastime and hobbies as much as I usually am? Sorts of things like that. Are we in line with how we usually present and how we usually behave? Same thing with our emotions. Am I more stressed than I usually am? Am I as optimistic as I usually am? Am I maybe a little bit more pessimistic? Am I maybe a little bit more worried than I usually am? Am I being more emotive than I usually am? Are things sort of getting to me a little bit more? Or maybe am I less emotive? Am I less reactive? Am I not enjoying things the way I usually do? And then, of course, our attitude. And sorry, I alluded to optimism before. That probably sits more within the attitude bucket. But how am I approaching my life? How am I approaching to those things around me? Am I easily becoming overwhelmed? Am I excited about things that I usually participate in? Am I feeling resilient? Am I thinking like, am I concentrating on the things that are in my control versus out of my control? So taking time to reflect across these three areas and recognizing that we'll also see an interplay between these three areas as well. How we behave impacts how we feel, our attitude impacts how we're feeling will generally impact our attitude, and also how what our attitude is will impact the behaviors that we're exhibiting in the world around us and how we're interacting with others. So take time to reflect on these components individually, but also when you view them as one thing, when you view them as factors that are impacting each other, how are you seeing yourself travel through your life at the moment? Is it in line with your values, or are you starting to creep away from those values? And that could be the sign that you might not be having the most healthy mind at that time.
So what happens if I'm not in a healthy mind? If I reflect and I think, yeah, you know what, I'm a bit more touchy than what I usually am. Maybe I'm getting a little bit short-tempered or snappy with people. And if somebody came to me seeking a chat or seeking some support, how would I go about politely letting that person know that now is not the right time for me, and that they may be best seeking that support from somebody else who has a healthier mind at that point in time?
Yeah, and it's a really important thing to understand, right? That when we're seeking to support someone else through an "Are you okay?" conversation or any type of experience, we're wanting to sit down with that person and ask them to share how they're feeling, and we're expecting that to maybe not be the most positive conversation in regards to them, you know, describing that they're high flying at that moment and feeling fantastic. It's important to recognize that how we're feeling and our own state of mental well-being in that moment is going to impact how we then respond. And we don't want to be responding in that conversation where we inadvertently start to twist it around onto ourselves, and or that we load ourselves with an additional level of emotional load that overloads ourselves and pushes our mental well-being down. So it's an important thing to acknowledge. Now, what's also then important to know is, even if you are not personally potentially in a state where you've got the capacity to sit down and talk with someone about how they're going, there's still some terrific and positive roles that you can take in supporting someone if you are concerned about them. One might be reflecting on who else you feel in their life might be in a position to have this conversation. Now, you don't want to be going around and talking to everyone in their circle about, oh, I'm a bit worried about this person or that person or whatnot, but maybe just pick one person. Maybe it's another one of their colleagues, maybe it's another one in their family group or their social network, and just explain to them that you have been noticing a couple of things within around that person, and that you think it might be worth someone checking in with them. And that just for you in that moment, that you know, for yourself, that might not be a role that you can play, but are they in a position to be able to play that role for them as well? So you can sort of, again, link to the person you're concerned about, but maybe stepping to the side and encouraging someone else to check in with that person as well can be a really valuable step. And even if you are in a positive state of mind, sometimes you may still not be the most appropriate person to reach out to someone that you're concerned about. So think about this from a concept of, maybe I'm not in a robust state myself to ask the question, who else could I link in? And then secondly as well, even if you are in a healthy state of mind, just quietly reflecting beforehand, do I feel like I am an appropriate person to be having this conversation with? Or is there someone else that I could lead in?
I think that's a really important reflection to have, and to not put that additional pressure upon ourselves, particularly on a day like today, Are You Okay Day, to have those conversations with everybody, particularly if you're not feeling well. So maybe as we move across to the next slide, we can reflect on ways to maintain a healthy mind. And I'll share a personal example for myself, where recently I found that I was in a bit of a funk, and I identified that it was because of lack of exercise. And exercise plays a significant role in who I am as a person, my daily structure, and my family structure. And despite knowing how much I love it and enjoy it, and knowing how much I needed to go and exercise to get myself out of that funk, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And it wasn't until I guess somebody in my network gave me a bit of a nudge and actually got me involved with a local gym program. It was like one of those 4-week intensive programs. And that's what I needed to kind of pull me out of where I was at that point in time. So it took an external influence. It took somebody to check in on me to say, hey, James, have you thought about doing this, to really give me back that structure that I desperately craved. So Oliver, while exercise may be one thing that works for me, what are some of the other factors that we can see here which people can use to help themselves maintain a healthy mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some terrific things in your personal story there, James, to unpack around the power of an Are You Okay conversation as well, before I quickly get into how people can look after themselves. But even an Are You Okay conversation can be really effective, not leading someone to professional support, but just getting them back into some of their healthy habits as well that can help their well-being. So that's fantastic. But when we're looking at maintaining our own healthy minds, about doing those things that we really know bring us a sense of positive emotion, help us engage with our communities, helps us to be part of positive relationships, attached to our meaning, build a sense of achievement, and live a vitality-based life. So really what we're wanting to do here is connect with things that you know are your strengths. So take some time to reflect on your strengths, because if you engage in those activities that you know that you're good at, or that you know that bring forward your strong sense of personal values, that will help you link to the things that you know help you feel good about yourself. What can also help you to maintain a healthy mind is focusing on what you can control. So stress and anxiousness live in the space of us overemphasizing and prioritizing the things that are out of our control. We've got concerns of negative outcomes based on things that are outside of our control. So taking a breath, taking a moment, making sure we're coming back to, well, what in my situation can I control, can help us to relieve some of that anxiousness and distress that we might be feeling as well. So take a time, take a moment, recognize when you're external and bring it back internal. Give your mind a break as well. We live in a constant state of stress. That's one thing we do as humans. We're on to the next thing, next thing, next thing. Make sure you're proactively building into your schedule some time to recover, not just physically, but mentally as well. Acknowledge your emotions as well. Your emotions are your emotions. How you react to something, how you respond to something, that is how you are feeling in that moment. Allow yourself to acknowledge that, so then you can make a decision on how you want to proceed forward is really important. If you deny your feelings, if you deny your emotions in that moment, I'm not saying exhibiting them, but if you deny acknowledging them, they're still there and they're still going to impact you. Accept your personal vulnerabilities, or if it's a positive emotions, your optimism in that moment, and roll with it, and then elect to take your next moment as well. That can help you bring a sense of control. Be mindful of your exposure to stress. So be mindful about how much you're engaging in one day that is withdrawing from your resilience bank and what's depositing into your resilience bank. Always take time to express gratitude. Often we focus on the things that are detracting from us, the things that aren't quite right, the things we're not content with, but there is always at least a couple of things in our lives that we can be grateful for. Stopping and taking a moment to be grateful can help us to really recognize that and then look for that in our days. And of course, living with vitality. It's a lot easier to feel better mentally if you're living a healthy lifestyle, if you're exercising, if you're eating right, if you're getting enough sleep. They're just some ways of some cheap wins to try and build up that sense of positive well-being as well.
I wanted to take a moment to reflect on that strategy there of expressing gratitude, and a conversation that I had with a colleague not so long ago. And this colleague was expecting the birth of their first child, and they really reflected on how grateful they were just to have a coffee in the morning with their partner before work. And so whilst in my day-to-day routine, I almost see coffee as a necessity to get me up and get going, but they kind of flipped the view of that. Like, how special is it that I can just sit down and have a coffee with my partner? And now that I have two kids, I can see that, yes, that is worthwhile kind of reflecting and really expressing gratitude for, because as soon as you have one, two, multiple kids, sometimes those moments evaporate and you don't get them again. And so really just being grateful for those little things, whether it's time to have a coffee in the morning, maybe it's having the ability to walk from the bus or the train into the office on those days that you're in the office. They can be really special moments, and to give you that sense of satisfaction, gratitude, and purpose, and helping you achieve that state of healthy mind.
Absolutely. The little quick example I'll leave with everyone again on this is, if for everyone that's tuning in, if I asked you to identify everything in the room you're sitting in now that's red, slowly, it might take you a little bit of time to start to find the first red thing that's in the room, but over time, all of a sudden, that room's going to start being redder and redder and redder. You'll notice red in all the little things, the labels, the pen that might be on the desk, whatever's in the corner, and all of a sudden the room's really red. Same thing in our lives, you know, our work, everything, we're rushing from one thing. I've got to get this project done, I've got to get this thing didn't pay off, or whatever, that relationship fell over. When we keep looking at the things that didn't happen and we're focusing on the things we want to get better at, or the things that need to improve, we're always living in that state of deficit, and we train our brains to focus on those things. So just like identifying everything in the room that's red, if you take the time to identify the things in your life that you're grateful for, it'll train you to start appreciating those things more. And just like you said, James, I'll start popping up in all those little spaces on the walk to the bus, etc.
Thank you. There's a little thought nugget for those that are listening in. Next slide, please. And we might pivot here to, we've reflected on our own healthy mind. Do I have one? Yes, I do. How do I now check in on others. So given that today is Are You OK Day, and a lot of us are coming together to open up conversations, it is important to remember that today isn't the only day that we can check in on others. And in fact, this year's theme is Are You OK Any Day? So Oliver, can you please walk us through how to ask
Yeah,
someone if they are okay?
absolutely. And what we've been talking today are really around having a healthy mind, probably actually sits in what I'd call the prior preparation prevents poor performance part of the ask, are you okay model. So this is even before you ask, that little reflection point about, am I in myself in a correct state of mind to be able to support someone else through this moment as well. And if you engage in those healthy habits that we've been talking about, hopefully more often than not, you are. But then when we get to the actual are you okay model, the first one is ask. Now, what I would be saying, again, under the prior preparation model is, first of all, making sure that you're prepared to ask. So prepare to ask by making sure that you've noted out a time in the day where you and the other individual have got 20 minutes. And you don't need to obviously book it into their calendar, and I'm going to ask you if you're okay. But try and organize it so you know you've got at least 20 minutes and they've got 20 minutes to allow the conversation to flow and not be rushed. Prepare yourself with some examples of why you're asking this person, are they okay? So where did you see it play out, this concern for yourself? Was it the way they interacted with this certain person on this day? Was it the way that they responded to this certain setback? Have some examples to make it more tangible as to why you're asking okay. Once you've got all that, and then you also pick the correct environment, so making sure that one that's feels okay to talk to. If you're a male to a male, probably trying to find a place where you can sit both facing forward rather than towards each other. That can be a little bit more intimidating. And some of that's obviously private, or at least enabling you to speak openly without the fear of concern of others in the workplace or around you listening in. Once you've done that, it's about asking. You can ask, are you okay, in a million different ways, but just make sure it's neutral. Are you okay? How have you been? Don't give it a negative connotation. You're not okay, are you? You're not down, are you? You're not in a low state of well-being. As soon as you ask it from a negative stance, you add in this connotation that if they say, yes, I am kind of down, or I'm not doing that great, that's actually a negative. Being down is not a fantastic place to be in life, but there's nothing wrong with it. It is part of being a human. So you don't want to be putting that negative connotation on it. Ask it reasonably straightforward, but watch your affect. Don't ask it really in their face, but just nice and calm. I noticed this, I noticed that. I just wanted to check in and see, are you okay? Something like that is a really powerful way to ask it. Once you've asked it, it's then about recognizing that you want to be spending 80% of the time listening and 20% of the time talking. So make sure that you're encouraging them to talk. And the way that you do this is through asking open-ended questions. And that's the who, what, where, when, how, and why questions that encourages the person to keep building on their story and sharing with you as much as you want. Asking open-ended questions also breaks down any level of misunderstanding, because it's more than one-worded responses. What you then also want to do with listening is active listening, phone down, computer away, no distractions, and add in these little what we call micro skills to help build the conversational way. Reflect back to the person what you're hearing, and do the little mm-hms and the ahas along the way that show that you're invested as well. Once you feel like the person is shared, and that could take 15 or so minutes, it's then about encouraging action. Your role now is to be the conduit between this person and them taking some actions around supporting themselves to build up their state of well-being again as well. And encouragement can be everything from helping them reflect on what might have happened last time they felt like this, reflecting on who in their life they might be able to have a talk to, what activities they usually engage in that help them feel better, anything. It doesn't have to be talking to a psych, although that can always also be a good option as well. Always encouraging them. Don't you yourself leave away with the to-do list. It's about encouraging them to be walking away. And then finally, there is a little cheat sheet under encourage. If they're really stuck, it's a little trick question that could be great would be, Well, if a friend, what would you tell a friend of yours to do if they were feeling like this? What permissions would you be saying that you would be that friend should be giving to them to themselves? Or what approaches do you think a friend that was feeling like this should do? Sometimes it helps people to externalize it outside of themselves. And finally, the check-in. Often the forgotten step. Make sure you note down in your diary to come back to that person a week or two later just to check in to see how they're going. This helps, A, show that you care genuinely about how they're going, and in a positive way, and I'm not going to articulate myself perfectly here, but just keeps them on the train of taking that action as well. So just a little gentle reminder for them to just keep taking that action without putting pressure on. To maybe take some of those actions that you was discussing in that encouragement phase.
Thank you. And encouragement is a great transition to our final slide here, which is where we will explore the resources or the support that is available any day. So first of all is around self-guided knowledge resources such as articles, podcasts, and tutorials are a great way to reflect and learn. But may I just add a note of caution to, where possible, verify that these sources are validated and not influenced. For me personally, sleep meditations, as an example, is a great way and a soft way that I engage in self-knowledge retention. Friends and family relationships. Now, as I shared, it was a member of my network who pulled me out of my recent funk and got me back onto the train of exercise. So I'd encourage you to consider who you have in your network, but also whose network may you be in? Who could be reaching out to you for support any day now? Community networks are also a great way to connect with others. This may be a way to connect with individuals who have a similar interest, like the presently popular run clubs, or connecting with others who have shared lived experiences. Workplace programs, such as employee assistance programs, are a confidential way for you personally to access support or to refer your colleagues to for support. And some EAPs are even open to family members, and that would be something worthwhile checking out. And then finally, as Oliver alluded to, clinical support. It's not always necessary, but it's also nothing to be afraid of. So it's important to keep this in mind for ourselves and for our network. Clinical support can be in the moment, that can be short-term or long-term, and in many situations, better sooner rather than later. Yeah. When we put support in the too hard basket, it can often get harder and harder to pull it out and to access that support for ourselves. The time now is 1 p.m, so I thank you for your time. And on behalf of Oliver and myself, we wish you all health and happiness, and really encourage you to be having those conversations with your friends, families, and colleagues. Thank you.